This is the story about the unending nightmare, shadows and whispers in Harrowville's House of Desolation. In the heart of the once bustling town of Harrowville lay a mansion shrouded in shadows and secrets. The House of Whispers, as it was ominously called, stood as a brooding sentinel over the town. Its dark, Gothic architecture, with twisted spires and weathered stones, told a story of despair and terror that resonated through the ages. The legend of the house was as old as the town itself. It was said that every family who dared to inhabit the house was plagued by inexplicable horrors. Objects would move of their own accord, windows would shatter without reason, doors would open and slam shut as if guided by unseen hands. The air would chill suddenly, and disembodied voices would whisper through the walls. The latest inhabitants, the Fairmont family, had moved in, dismissing the tales as mere superstitions. They were new to Harrowville and eager to start afresh. Little did they know they were stepping into a never-ending nightmare. It began subtly. A creak here, a chill there, but slowly the occurrences grew more frequent and more terrifying. Young Emily, the daughter, would wake up to find her toys rearranged, her dolls staring at her with hollow eyes. Thomas, the father, heard whispers late at night, whispers that seemed to call his name. His mother, Anne, was the first to see them, the shadows, figures dark and ethereal fleeting at the corner of her eye, their moans echoing through the house. No one else saw them at first, but Anne knew they were there, watching, waiting. Days turned into weeks, and the horrors escalated. Doors would lock themselves, trapping the family members in rooms. Mirrors would crack, showing twisted reflections of terror. The house seemed to breathe, its very walls pulsing with an unseen force. The Fairmonts tried to leave, but something would always stop them. A sudden illness, a lost job, a financial crisis. It was as if the house itself was keeping them there, feeding off their fear. They sought help from priests, mediums, paranormal experts, but none could cleanse the house of its dark energy. The more they tried, the angrier the spirits became. The whispers grew louder, the shadows bolder, the terror more palpable. The family grew gaunt and weary, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. They stopped leaving the house, stopped seeing friends, stopped living. They were trapped in a never-ending cycle of horror, prisoners in their own home. No one in Harrowville dared to visit them anymore. The house had claimed them, and the town knew better than to interfere. The Fairmonts were left to their fate, a fate of never-ending torment and despair. As the years wore on, the house stood, its windows like hollow eyes, its doors like a gaping mouth. The whispers continued, the shadows danced, and the Fairmonts were no more. The house waited, silent and patient, for its next victims. The town of Harrowville was never quite the same after the Fairmont family's tragedy. The children stopped playing near the cursed mansion, their laughter replaced by hushed whispers and fearful glances. The adults, too, avoided the street where the House of Whispers stood, its dark presence a constant reminder of the unknown terror that lay within. Years turned into decades, and the house continued its silent vigil, waiting, watching. The stories of the Fairmonts became a cautionary tale, a horrifying legend whispered in the dead of night. But as time wore on, newcomers would occasionally arrive, unknowing and unheeding of the house's dark past. And so it was that the Wainwright family came to Harrowville. They were a hopeful family, full of dreams and aspirations. They saw the House of Whispers as a project, a historical building to restore and make their home. They were warned, of course. The townsfolk tried to dissuade them, but the Wainwrights were determined. At first, the house seemed to welcome them. There were no whispers, no shadows, no chills. They laughed off the stories as mere folklore and began their restoration. But the house was merely biding its time. It started with the dreams. Nightmares filled with screams and cries, haunted faces and twisted bodies. Each member of the family experienced them, waking in terror, their sheets soaked in sweat. They dismissed it as stress, the result of their hard work, but the dreams were just the beginning. Slowly, the house began to show its true nature. Tools would vanish, only to reappear in impossible places. Paint would peel off the walls as soon as it was applied. Doors would refuse to close, windows would refuse to open. The children, twins Lucy and Liam, began to see things. Shadows in their room, faces in the windows, figures standing at the foot of their beds. They would wake screaming, their parents rushing to comfort them, but the terror remained. Mr. Wainwright, a rational and logical man, refused to believe in the supernatural. He chided his family for their fears and continued the restoration with stubborn determination. But the house had other plans. One by one, the family was broken. Lucy began to withdraw, her bright eyes dulled by fear. She would sit for hours staring at the walls, whispering to unseen presences. Liam became angry and violent, lashing out at his family, his friends. Mrs. Wainwright, once a cheerful and loving mother, fell into depression. She would wander the house crying, calling for children long lost. Mr. Wainwright himself was not spared. He began to hear the whispers, the calls, the promises, and the threats. His mind began to unravel, his sanity slipping away. The house was relentless, its torment unending. It fed on their fear, their pain, their despair. It twisted their love, their hope, their dreams into nightmares. They tried to leave, but the house wouldn't let them. Their car would fail, their money would vanish, their health would deteriorate. They were trapped, prisoners of the very walls they sought to restore. And still, the house continued its dark dance, its shadows creeping, its whispers growing, its hunger insatiable. There was no escape, no respite, no salvation. Only suffering, only pain, only the house of whispers. And the house still stands, its dark windows watching, its twisted doors waiting for the next family, the next victims, the next chapter in its never-ending story of horror and despair. The House of Whispers became an unspoken scar on the face of Harrowville. People passed it with hurried steps, avoiding glances at its decaying facade. The story of the Wainwright family spread like wildfire, a chilling testament to the house's insidious nature. But the house was patient. It knew that curiosity is a powerful lure, and it would only be a matter of time before someone else would venture inside its haunted walls. Years went by, and the house seemed to fall into a slumber. The town of Harrowville slowly began to recover from the tragedy that had befallen the Wainwright family. Then a newcomer arrived, Dr. Elias Caldwell, a renowned psychologist with a fascination for the paranormal, heard the whispers of the House of Whispers. Intrigued by the tales of horror and suffering, he decided to unravel the mystery that had claimed so many lives. With a team of researchers, he set up equipment in the house, determined to either debunk the myths or capture evidence of the supernatural. The house seemed to be aware of his intentions. From the moment Dr. Caldwell and his team entered, they felt a heavy presence, a darkness that weighed down their very souls. The air was thick with dread, and the shadows seemed to dance in the corners of their eyes. They began their investigation, recording everything, analyzing every sound, every movement. They conducted seances, attempting to communicate with the entities that were rumored to inhabit the house. But the house was not a mere passive entity to be studied. It was alive, and it did not like to be prodded. Things began to go wrong. Equipment would malfunction, recordings would be mysteriously erased, and the team began to experience a growing sense of unease. Then, the nightmares began. Dr. Caldwell found himself haunted by visions of the families that had suffered within the house's walls. He would see their faces, twisted in agony, hear their screams, feel their despair. Despite the growing terror, he pressed on, driven by a need to understand, to know, to conquer the house's dark secrets. But the house would not be conquered. One by one, his team began to unravel. Some would flee, unable to bear the crushing weight of the house's malevolence. Others would succumb to madness, their minds broken by the relentless terror. Dr. Caldwell himself began to change. He became obsessed, spending days and nights in the house, listening to the whispers, following the shadows. He began to see them, the victims of the house. They would speak to him, beckoning him, warning him, taunting him. His once rational mind was consumed by the house. He could feel it in his bones, in his blood. It was calling to him, drawing him in, showing him things no human was meant to see. The house revealed its true nature, a nexus of suffering and despair, a living entity that fed on pain and fear. It was ancient, timeless, and it had seen humanity at its most vulnerable. Dr. Caldwell's obsession turned into a nightmare. He could no longer distinguish between reality and the twisted visions the house showed him. He became a prisoner, trapped within the house's dark embrace. His team abandoned him, the town of Harrowville shunned him, and he was left alone with the house. And the house was never truly alone. It continued its dark dance, its whispers growing. its shadows creeping, its hunger insatiable. There was no escape, no respite, no salvation, only suffering, only pain, only the House of Whispers. And the house still stands, waiting, watching, hungry for the next chapter in its never-ending story of horror and despair. Years passed, and the House of Whispers remained a dark enigma on the outskirts of Harrowville. The once renowned Dr. Caldwell had become a hermit, a shadow of his former self, consumed by the house and its dark secrets. People would occasionally glimpse him through the shattered windows, his eyes vacant, his face gaunt and haggard. But the house was not done. A new family moved into Harrowville, unaware of the house's history. The Grants were a loving family with 2 young children seeking a fresh start in a new town. So their innocence and happiness were a beacon to the house. It sensed them, hungered for them. The youngest child, Lily, was particularly sensitive to the house. She would stare at it from her bedroom window, drawn to its dark allure. She began to hear the whispers, soft at first, then growing, calling to her. Her parents dismissed her fears as childish imagination. But Lily knew something was wrong. The house wanted her, needed her. As the weeks went by, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Lily began to have nightmares, visions of the house, of the people who had suffered within its walls. Her health began to deteriorate, her once bright eyes now dull, her laughter replaced by a haunting silence. Her parents were desperate, consulting doctors, therapists, anyone who could help their little girl. But the house's grip was strong and it would not let go. Lily's condition worsened, and she became a shell of her former self, consumed by the house and its relentless call. Then, one night, she vanished. Her parents were frantic, searching everywhere, the town rallying to help find the lost child. But deep down, they knew where she was. The House of Whispers had claimed another victim. The Grants were broken, their lives shattered by the loss of their beloved daughter. They moved away, unable to bear the sight of the house, the sound of its eternal whispers. And still the house stands, its hunger never satisfied, its whispers never silenced. It waits, patient and eternal, knowing that there will always be more victims, more suffering to feed its dark soul. The House of Whispers is a living testament to horror and despair, a place where happiness dies and only pain remains. It is a reminder that some things are beyond understanding, beyond reason, beyond hope. It is a house where nightmares are born, where terror reigns, where the echoes of suffering linger long after the last scream has faded. It is a house that will never be forgotten, never be silenced, never be conquered. It is the House of Whispers. This chilling tale, with its haunting imagery, leaves a lingering sense of dread, adding to the legend of the House of Whispers. If you liked the story, please hit the like button and share, and by doing so, you'll be the first to receive the fascinating upcoming stories. Thank you.